up half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound. The clerk smiled faintly. And yet, said Scrooge, you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work. The clerk observed that it was only once a year. A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December, said Scrooge, buttoning his great coat to the chin. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning. The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no greatcoat, went down a slide on Cornhill at the end of a lane of boys 20 times in honor of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play at Blind Man's Buff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of building up a yard where it had so little business to be that one could scarcely help fancying it must have been run there when it was a young house playing at hide-and-seek with other houses and forgotten the way out again. It was old enough now and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. The fog and frost so hung about the black old gateway of the house that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in mournful meditation on the threshold. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker at the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Also that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London, even including, which is a bold word, the corporation, aldermen, and livery. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not the knocker but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked as Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on his ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath or hot air, and, though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That and its livid color made it horrible, but its horror seemed to be in spite of the face and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause with a moment's irresolution before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it first, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtail sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on, so he said "pooh, pooh," and closed it with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like a thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant cellar below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes on its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. You may talk vaguely about driving a coach and six up a good old flight of stairs, or through a bad young Act of Parliament, but I mean to say you might have got a hearse up that staircase and taken it broadwise with the splinter bar towards the wall and the door towards the balustrades and done it easy. There was plenty of width for that and room to spare, which is perhaps the reason why Scrooge thought he saw a locomotive hearse going on before him in the gloom. Half a dozen gas lamps out of the streets wouldn't have lighted the entry too well, so you may suppose that it was pretty dark with Scrooge's dip. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for that. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and a little saucepan of gruel. Scrooge had a cold in his head upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Lumber room as usual, old fire guard, old shoes, 2 fish baskets washing up on 3 legs, and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. It was a very low fire indeed, nothing on such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close to it and brood over it before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from such a handful of fuel. The fireplace was an old one, built by some Dutch merchant long ago, and paved all round with quaint Dutch tiles, designed to illustrate the scriptures. There were Cains and Abels, Pharaoh's daughters, queens of Sheba, angelic messengers descending through the air on clouds like featherbeds, Abraham's, Belshazzar's, apostles putting off to sea in butterboats, hundreds of figures to attract his thoughts, and yet that face of Marley, 7 years dead, came like the ancient prophet's rod, and swallowed up the whole. If each smooth tile had been a blank at first, with power to shape some picture on its surface from the disjointed fragments of his thoughts, there would have been a copy of old Marley's head on every one. "Humbug," said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After several turns, he sat down again. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell, that hung in the room, and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted half a minute or a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased as they had begun together. They were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "It's humbug still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His color changed, though, when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leaped up as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost," and fell again. The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights, and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtail and his coat skirts, and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. Nor did he believe it even now, though he looked the phantom through and through and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about his head and chin, which wrapper he had not observed before. He was still incredulous and fought against his senses. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much." Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you then?" said Scrooge, raising his voice. You're particular for shade. He was going to say to a shade, but substituted this as more appropriate. "In life I was your partner, Jacob Marley." Can you sit down?" asked Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him. "I can." "Do it then." Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that in the event of this being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. but the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace as if he were quite used to it. "You don't believe me," observed the ghost. "I don't," said Scrooge. "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?" "I don't know," said Scrooge. "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because," said Scrooge, "a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There is more of gravy than of gravy about you. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his terror, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. To sit, staring at those fixed glazed eyes, in silence for a moment, would play. Scrooge felt the very deuce with him. There was something very awful, too, in the spectre's being provided with an infernal atmosphere of its own. Scrooge could not feel it himself, but this was clearly the case, for though the ghost sat perfectly motionless, its hair, its skirts, and tassels were still agitated as if by the hot vapor from an oven. "You see this toothpick?" said Scrooge, returning quickly to the charge, for the reason just assigned, and wishing, though it were only for a second, to divert the vision's stony gaze from himself. "I do," replied the ghost. "You are not looking at it," said Scrooge. "But I see it," said the ghost, notwithstanding. "Well," returned Scrooge, "I have but to swallow this, and be for the rest of my days persecuted by a legion of goblins, all of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you, humbug." As at this the spirit raised a frightful cry, and shook its chain with such a dismal and appalling noise, that Scrooge held on tight to his chair to save himself from falling in a swoon. But how much greater was his horror, when the phantom, taking off the bandage round its head, as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hand before his face. "Mercy," he said. "Dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?" "Man of the worldly mind," replied the ghost, "do you believe in me or not?" "I do," said Scrooge. "I must." "But why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?" "It is required of every man," the ghost returned, "that the spirit with him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide, and if the spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world, oh, woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth, and turn to happiness." Again the spectre raised a cry, and shook its chain, and wrung its shadowy hands. "You are fettered," said Scrooge, trembling. "Tell me why." "I wear the chain I forged in life," replied the ghost. "I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you?" Scrooge trembled more and more. "Or would you know," pursued the ghost, "the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain." Scrooge glanced about him on the floor in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. "Jacob," he said imploringly, "old Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob." "I have none to give," the ghost replied. "It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you what I would. A very little more is all permitted of me. I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house, mark me. In life my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me." It was a habit with Scrooge, whenever he became thoughtful, to put his hand in his breeches pockets. Pondering on what the ghost had said, he did so now, but without lifting up his eyes or getting off his knees. "You must have been very slow about it, Jacob," Scrooge observed in a businesslike manner, though with humility and deference. "Slow," the ghost repeated. 7 years dead," mused Scrooge, "and traveling all the time." "The whole time," said the ghost. "No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse." "You travel fast?" said Scrooge. "On the wings of the wind," replied the ghost. "You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years," said Scrooge. The ghost, on hearing this, set up another cry and clanked its chain so hideously in the dead silence of the night that the ward would have been justified in indicting it for a nuisance. "Oh, captive, bound, and double-ironed," cried the phantom, "not to know that ages of incessant labor by immortal creatures for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which it is susceptible is all developed. Not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one life's opportunities misused. Yet such was I, oh, such was I." "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob," faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. "Business," cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. "Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business." It held up its chain at arm's length, as if that were the cause of all its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again. "At this time of the rolling year," the spectre said, "I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me?" Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear the spectre going on at this rate, and began to quake exceedingly. "Hear me," cried the ghost. "My time is nearly gone." "I will," said Scrooge, "but don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob. Pray." "How it is that I appear before you in a shape that you can see, I may not tell. I have sat invisible beside you many a day." It was not an agreeable idea. Scrooge shivered and wiped the perspiration from his brow. "That is no light part of my penance," pursued the ghost. "I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance of hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer." "You are always a good friend to me," said Scrooge. "Thank ye." "You will be haunted," resumed the ghost, "by 3 spirits. Scrooge's countenance fell almost as low as the ghost's had done.
Is that 20 minutes?
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I'm gonna close this.
It's done?
Yes, this is done.
Ah, okay.
Thank you so much.
No problem. That was nice. It's a really good book, actually. I've never read it. Just seen the...
Oh, have you seen the movie?
I've seen the movie. I've seen like several adaptations because it's a classic. But the book is actually quite well written, I have to say. How many have you done?
3.
Okay, so you need some more.
Yes.
Yeah. I presume making blocks doesn't interrupt. No. Unless I start throwing blocks at them.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I'm recording, right?
Yes, you're
Yeah.
recording.
Yes. Thank you.
Wow.
So I'm here basically. I will throw blocks at you, Klaus,
Okay.
every once in a while. This is part of the experiment.
Something wrong.
So
It's
what-
part of the experiment.
What book do you want to read?
I don't know. What do you have to read?
Dickens, there's something on Gutenberg.
Okay. So I don't know, maybe some Christmas story.
Christmas Carol. Do you want to read that?
I don't know.
Dickens.
Yeah, Christmas.
I don't know this one.
This is the Charles Dickens. It's the traditional Scrooge.
The one that he read.
It's a good idea if I read the same.
Yeah, it's alright.
Okay. And what is the idea of the experiment?
Just want to capture the horizon lyrics.
Okay.
For like 20 minutes.
For 20 minutes. Okay, then I will read the Christmas Carol because it seems not to be too complicated. Right. Bjorn,
Yeah.
did you try to read Ulysses?
Ulysses?
Yeah.
No.
Then you need to try that.
All right.
It's really hard.
So this is James Joyce, right?
This one. Sorry, Bjorn, what did you say?
James Joyce?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we want that we have this area.
Uh-huh.
So I'm gonna click
Okay.
it and you follow the top.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay.
And you can scroll.
I'm just allowed to scroll. Yeah.
And
Okay.
I'm gonna set the time for 2 minutes and
Okay.
okay.
Good. Thank you. Stage 1. Marley's ghost. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by clergy. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard the coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile. And my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it, for the country's done for it. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and so solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. If we were not perfectly convinced that Hamlet's father died before the play began, there would be nothing more remarkable in his talking a stroll at night, in an easterly wind upon his own ramparts, than there would be in any other middle-aged gentleman rashly turning out after dark in a breezy spot, say St. Paul's churchyard for instance, literally to astonish his son's weak mind. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There he stood, years afterwards, above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, But he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. Scrooge! A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shivered his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips grew, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days, and he didn't thaw in 1 degree at Christmas. External
All right.
You can get it if I move the horse. You can get it.
But there's these no need to valid rules that you can do.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, you finished your reading.
Yes.
You were reading out loud. Was that a requirement?
No, it's not.
Oh, not. Oh, you didn't tell me.
You don't have to read loud. I thought that was your style of reading.
No, you didn't tell me because we were talking about earlier about reading out loud. You didn't tell me.
There's two reading.
Klaus is reading out loud as well.
I thought
So,
that
so
was
you should tell people they don't have to read out loud. I mean, you,
So I thought maybe that was
no.
your
I thought it
way.
was part of the experiment to keep track of
I
where,
think how it means like.
because then you can
physical
actually
work.
track what you're reading, right?
Yeah.
All right. Oh no.
Yeah, the one that keeps me alive longer. But it's not so.
Jesus.
Alright. Of course you can.
No, you didn't.
Exactly. That is one possibility. Yeah, 15 degrees.
Yeah, that's what the wind doesn't for the chemical.
Sorry, okay, you go here. Alright, but this you cannot do. Oh, you can, of course.
Oh,
Yeah, that's okay.
that didn't sound right.
Then I say check.
So that was a chord?
But you try that.
Just
I'm not sure if it was tuned.
it doesn't sound quite in tune, I would say.
I can choose
You have a
that.
tuner?
Uh,
I should have a tuner as well.
actually, you just change that.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Which do you know which
It should be E.
should be E?
Actually, this is E4. I think it's okay. The next one. Maybe
So alright, so it should be in the middle, right?
tighten it. Yes.
Hold on. So that's too loose. What?
Now that I started
Okay, that's
walking
too
over,
much.
it tells me it's time to move.
Okay.
Okay, you want me to tune that?
Do you know the strings? Like
That E.
Yeah, because it's
well,
yeah,
quite sensitive. Oh, there you go.
no, I only had 2 sevens.
It should be a D.
After cooking yesterday, I also had 7 sevens. Yeah.
Should be D. I'm not sure.
Just walking around the house until you get 10K.
Yeah.
That's A and D and G and D.
D.
Okay. Check.
Yeah.
That's G. Don't yes. That's okay. That's B.
No, it's not it.
That's E.
It's definitely not it.
Just like you, like I'm kind of delaying.
All right. So
Yeah, exactly.
sounds about right, right?
It's like
Okay.
It's like
Well, now I can only blame myself.
It was clear it was going to happen. It was just a matter of time.
It's just gonna.
Yes, so we want to check.
I asked for a rolling pin, this is what I got. It is better than nothing. Don't hold that in something. Yeah, I don't know. A wine bottle maybe? Do we still have some? Do we have empty wine bottles? Yeah, but it would need to. Yes, it would be heavier, but the label would be counterproductive. So, for an empty one, would at least more easily remove the label.
Luca,
Yeah.
I think there are empty wine bottles at the front door.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is.
Oops.
Ah,
This is all right.
That's a nice straight one.
What am I doing wrong? Aha. No, even here. Ah, that's no good. Complex stuff.
But you mind if there's a little bit of the background that was left and you put a foil over it? That might work
yeah,
because
possibly.
I think I don't get it down very
The problem
clearly.
with the foil is that the foil does not stick to itself, so it sticks to other things.
Yeah. Right, and try to get the top cover down and maybe then the rest surface also.
Really? It's funny.
I have a dead bishop anyway, so I don't know. It was say one of that. I'm not using this.
Okay. Yeah, actually, see the front one seems to be easier than the back one.
Okay.
Oh. Yeah.
Those are big cookies.
Okay.
eats what he eats.
Well, you can do it on any time.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Go. No, the funny thing is, I was sitting and after I started moving, he told me, hey, you should start moving.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it thought you were asleep before. Now that you're awake.
I gave up.
You gave up?
It's I have small fingers. I cannot really do it. I cannot really do it. Excuses.
Excuses.
Excuses me. Excuses is me.
You're not excused. It's unexcusable.
I think you are right. I only have explanations, no excuses.
Mm-hmm.
So this looks hard work.
So, how they do it in professional